No.
नहीं ये तो
Morning, everyone. My name is Sanchit, and I'm here to give a presentation on attachment theory by Dr. John Bowlby. So, John Bowlby was a British child psychiatrist and psychologist. He was the first attachment theorist. He described attachment as a lasting psychological connection between significant. He described attachment as lasting psychological connection between two beings. According to Bowlby, attachment serves to keep the infant close to mother, thus improving child's chances of survival. So, what is attachment? Attachment is a strong and affectionate tie that we have with special people in our lives uh, that will help us to experience our pleasure when we interact with them, and to be comforted by their and to be comforted by their presence in times of stress. So, feeding was seen as the central context in which caregiver and babies developed attachment. Uh, so, Harlow and Zimmerman conducted a very interesting experiment in 1959, in which they separated monkeys from their moms, and then they were separated by surrogates. The surrogate number one was cloth covered, and surrogate number two was surrogate number two was a wire mesh with bottle. So we could see that the rhesus monkeys were involved with the that the monkeys were involved uh, comfort contact comfort rather than their hunger satisfaction. Attachment is not an all or none process. So Answorth and Bell assessed over assessed over I'm sorry Answorth and Answorth and Bell assessed about 100 American infants and their primary caregivers for the quality of attachment. They found four different styles of attachment: secure, anxious, fearful, and avoidant. So as you can see,
तो फिर से आएगा
so styles of attachment, as we can see, we can describe the styles of attachment in two axes. Axis number one is how we perceive others, and axis number two is how we perceive self. So if a child has positive model of self and positive model of others, it means that the child does not have anxiety, unlike me, and he does not avoid someone, so he's secure in forming relationships. If a child has a if a child has a negative models model of himself and of others. So his personality, so the child is afraid of others and of forming relationships. So we describe this personality style as fearful. Uh, and if a child has negative model of self and and positive model of others, so the child will be anxious. And avoidant is when the child has negative models of others but a positive model of self. So in Bowlby's mythological theory, we can see that the infant's emotional tie is the response that is the response that promotes survival. So he said that the quality of attachment of the child to the primary person has profound implications has has a has profound implications in the future as as the child of as the child is able to form trusting relationships. So the overall idea is that mothers who are available and responsive to the infant's needs establish sense of security in their children. It creates a secure base for the child, for the for the child to explore and form connections. So we can see four phases of attachment development. Phase number first is the pre-attachment phase, which is from birth to 6 weeks. Phase number two is attachment in making phase, which is from 6 weeks to 16 months. Phase number phase number three is the phase of attachment in which the child forms a clear-cut attachment, and it is from 6 to 8 months to 18 months to 2 years. And stage number four is formation of reciprocal relationship from 18 months to 2 years onwards. So let's start with the pre-attachment phase. So in this phase, the child has innate signals like smiling or crying or grasping, due to which the mom or the surrogate is attracted towards the child, and the closeness of the adult, uh, the, and the closeness of the adult uh, comforts the child, and the baby will start to recognize the smell, voice, and face of the mom, and the child is not yet attached. So stra- to so stra- stranger anxiety is absent in this child. Attachment in making phase, the infant responds differently to familiar caregiver than to strangers. The baby would babble and smile more, and he would also be quiet more easily. The infant learns that the actions affect the behavior of those around them, and the infant will develop a sense of trust. But the infant still does not protest if the child is separated from the mom. Uh, Third is the phase of attachment. In this phase, the baby will start to develop separation anxiety, in which the child is upset if in which the child is upset if the adult whom they have if the adult whom they trust leaves. The child would show distress when the mother leaves, and if the caregiver is supportive and sensitive, then this anxiety could be short-lived. Formation of reciprocal relationships with rapid growth in representation and language. By 2 years, the toddler is able to understand some of the factors and influence parents coming and going and to predict their return. Thus, separation anxiety declines. The child is also able to negotiate as the child uses request and persuasion to alter the goals of the adult. With age, the child depends less and less, and he has more confidence that the adult is accessible and responsive in times of need. So as you can see, the uh, study in a study in an African tribe uh, in which children were raised in a community setting. The child has the child still has a primary attachment, and as we can see with the example of Lawrence Gosling's, that the so Lawrence was psychiatrist, and he took eggs of geese. तो half of the eggs, जो half eggs थे वो तो मॉम के सामने रख दिए geese के आगे, आधे eggs थे उसने अपने आगे रखे incubator में. जब एग्स हैच हुए उन्होंने उसको देखा तो उन्होंने इम्प्रिंट कर लिया, तो उन्होंने लाइफ लॉन्ग ही लॉरेंस को फॉलो करा. इससे हमें ये पता चला कि वो जब एक जो मूविंग ऑब्जेक्ट को देखेंगे उसके ऊपर वो इम्प्रिंट करेंगे. इससे हम बॉल्बी की थ्योरी को वो कर सकते हैं प्रूफ. बट कॉन्स इसके हैं कि जेनेटिक्स में इतनी एडवांसमेंट के बाद भी एक भी जीन नहीं मिला अभी तक जो अटैचमेंट को एक्सप्लेन करे. ऑल्सो द चेक ट्विंस. So the Czech twins were a pair of twins who were abandoned and abused by their mom, and they were found by two sisters at the age of 7, and by the age of 14 they were able to form meaningful attachments. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Today, myself, Swarnima Thakur, is going to present a seminar presentation on the topic classical conditioning by Ivan Pavlov, and my moderator is Dr. Sarthak Bhandari. Ivan Petrovich Pavlov. Ivan Pavlov was a Soviet and a Russian physiologist known primarily for his work in classical conditioning. In the late 1890s, Ivan Pavlov, famous Russian physiologist, began to establish many of the basic principles of the classical conditioning. Pavlov carried out the experiment on the digestive gland as well as investigated the gastric function of the dog, and eventually won the Nobel Prize for the Physiology of Medicine in the 1902, becoming the first Russian Nobel laureate. A survey in the Review of General Psychology, published in 2002, ranked the Pavlov as the 24th most cited psychologist of the 20th century. Pavlov's principle of classical conditioning have been found to operate across a variety of behavior therapies and in the experiment and the clinical settings, such as educational classroom and even reducing phobias with systemic desensitization. During the year 1890 and 1900 especially, and to a lesser extent until the about 1930, Pavlov studied the secretory activity of digestion. While working, he has devised an operation to prepare miniature stomach or pouch. He isolated the stomach for ingested food while preserving its vagal nerve supply. The surgical procedure enabled him to study the gastrointestinal secretion in a normal animal over its lifespan. This work culminated in his book lecture on the work of digestive gland in 1897. Also, experiment carried out by the Pavlov and his pupils showed that the condition reflex originated in the cerebral cortex. According to the Pavlov, the condition reflex was a physiological phenomenon caused by the creation of new reflexive pathway created in the cortex of the brain by the conditioning process. Now let us see what is learning. Learning can be defined as any relatively permanent change in behavior that occur as a result of practice or experience. This definition has three important elements. Learning is a change in behavior. It is a change that takes place through practice or experience. Before it can be called learning, the change must be relatively permanent. Learning is a key process in the human behavior. It pervades everything we do and think. It plays a central role in the language we speak, our custom, our attitude and belief, our goals, our personality trait, and even our perception. How you dress, what you ate, what you thought about, how you evaluated other people, and even what you worried about are all rooted in your past experience or past learning. If we could understand some of the principle of the learning, we could have better idea of how to change behavior when we want to change. Types of learning. The three types of learning are as follow. The classical conditioning. Learning is thought to take place as a result of contiguity of environment event. When events occur closely together in time, person will probably come to associate the two. Operant conditioning. Learning is thought to result from the consequence of person's action. Social learning. Cooperate both classical and the operant model of learning, but also consider interaction between the person and the environment. Now let us see what is classical conditioning. Classical conditioning gets its name from the fact that it is the kind of learning situation that existed in the early classical experiment of Ivan P. Pavlov. Classical conditioning is also sometimes called respondent conditioning or Pavlovian conditioning. Pavlov designed an apparatus that could measure how much a dog mouth water in response to food or other thing in its environment. At the beginning of this experiment, Pavlov noted that no saliva flowed when he rang a bell. He then trained the dog by sounding the bell and shortly afterward presenting food. After the sound of the bell has been paired with the food a few times, he tested the effect of the training by measuring the amount of saliva that flowed when he rang the bell and did not present food. He found that some saliva was produced in response to the bell alone. He then resumed the training, paired presentation of the bell and food a few more times, and then tested again with the bell alone. As training continued, the amount of saliva on test with the bell alone increased. Thus, after training, the dog's mouth watered, salivated whenever the bell was sounded. This is what was learned. It is the conditioned response. This is a Pavlov apparatus for studying the conditioned salivary response. It consists of observation screen from which the Pavlov observed the dog behavior, and it also consists of a tube which is connected to the mouth of the dog for collection of the saliva, and there is a device attached which is used to count the drop of the saliva. Term that is important in understanding the classical conditioning: unconditioned stimulus, a stimulus that causes a response that is automatic, not learned. Unconditioned response, the response that is automatic and not learned. Conditioned stimulus, a previously neutral stimulus that, because of pairing with the unconditioned stimulus, now causes a conditioned response. Conditioned response, a learned response to a stimulus that was previously neutral. Process of acquisition, the overall process during which the organism learned to associate the two events, that is conditioned stimulus and the unconditioned stimulus. What are the events in the classical conditioning? Before conditioning, when the unconditioned stimulus, that is food, is presented to the dog, there was unconditioned response, that is salivation was present. Before conditioning, when neutral stimulus was presented to the dog, there was no conditioned response, that is no salivation was present. During conditioning, when there was pairing of the neutral stimulus and the unconditioned stimulus, response was present, that is unconditioned response was present, salivation present. After conditioning, when conditioned stimulus that was previously neutral stimulus was presented, then salivation is seen, that is conditioned response is present. Acquisition and extinction. This is the graph showing acquisition and extinction. What is acquisition? The acquisition of a conditioned response is usually gradual. As more and more trial, that is conditioned stimulus and the unconditioned stimulus pairing are given, conditioned response grows stronger and stronger. As you can see from the graph, when there is a pairing of a neutral stimulus and unconditioned stimulus, the graph grow more and more stronger. Extension, when the unconditioned stimulus food does not follow a conditioned stimulus, then conditioned response begin to decrease and eventually cause extinction. Spontaneous recovery. After a rest period and extension, conditioned response spontaneously recover. The term stimulus generalization, tendency to respond to stimulus similar to the conditioned stimulus is called generalization. Pavlov conditioned the dog's salivation by using a miniature vibrator on the thigh. When he subsequently stimulated other part of the dog's body, salivation dropped. In the graph, there is shown a response from the air nearest the thigh. When the miniature vibrator is used on the thigh, there is a maximum response seen. Stimulus discrimination. Discrimination is the process of learning to make one response to one stimulus and a different response or no response to another stimulus. The experimenter on some trial pair one stimulus, that is conditioned stimulus, with an unconditioned stimulus on the one trial, and another stimulus, conditioned stimulus, is presented alone without the unconditioned stimulus. This is the graph showing a stimulus discrimination. The graph represented by the circle, it is pairing of conditioned stimulus with the unconditioned stimulus, and the graph presented by the square. In this, conditioned stimulus is presented alone. What is the application of classical conditioning? Classical, it is applicated in flooding procedure for eliminating condition fear based on the principle of classical conditioning. During flooding, an individual is exposed to fear-inducing object or event. Since no unconditioned stimulus then follow, extension of fear eventually take place. A therapist may pursue a person who has an irrational fear of height to walk on to a high bridge and may keep the person there for a while under a careful supervision. Because no harm results from this experience, the person may eventually become less fearful. In case where fear-provoking thoughts are too painful, systemic desensitization is given, a progressive technique designed to replace anxiety with a relaxation. Starting with the least anxiety producing situation, the person alternatively visualize situation and relaxes. Gradually, the individual learn to relax while imagining situations that are increasingly more threatening. It has also application in extension and alteration of disturbing emotion response by classical conditioning, is one form of behavior therapy, or as it is also called behavior modification. And my reference is Introduction to Psychology by Clifford Morgan and Kaplan and Sadow's Synopsis of Psychiatry. Thank you.
Any questions? The audience? So secondly, talk about attachment, pathological attachment. Any take on four models of attachment? Pathological attachment, or these attachment theory. Absolutely. So if these attachments are not taken, there are secure attachments, insecure attachments. These are the result to that. I think very important is that touch. You say a mother having a secure attachment to the child, which takes place by 2 years of age. That maternal touch is very important, as you showed to that icon. But then you explain that genetic role is not very clear. And those goslings, they saw Conrad and then they subsequently had attachment with Conrad. So weren't they contradictory?
The point is that each is under our universal.
Do you feel attachment is genetic or environmental?
It is environmental, but which is other sir, जैसे वो drive का example था, बच्चे से show कर रहे थे, so we actually drive का जिसमें भी child was not primarily mobilized. So we community discussed it, but उस child, but वो child का एक primary actually 8% difference in the bond. Even though the system is bond, वो सारे children से community.
एक आदमी को डोनेट कर
सारे जो चिल्ड्रन थे वो स्टेट मतलब ओन स्टेट उनको रिस्पेक्ट एवरीवन वाज इन्वॉल्वड इन द लिविंग ऑफ एवरी चाइल्ड बट स्टिल 8% के साथ जो भी रहता है वो मॉम थे प्राइवेट वो अब एग्जांपल के बेसिस से एक जेनेटिक होना चाहिए एनवायरनमेंट चाहे जैसा भी
एग्जांपल तो जेनेटिक कैसे
सर So same thing, sir. जो environment था उसका वो open environment था, close environment था, वो लेकर के mount किया था. उसके बाद बावजूद भी एक attachment थी उसकी जो particularly strong.
क्या वो biological parent की थी?
सर नहीं सर वो कोई भी जिसके साथ बचपन से उसका एक bond क्रिएट
तो environmental
तो
environmental
बट सर उसका एक्सपोजर तो सबके साथ था सर. वो कायदे से सबके साथ सेम attachment.
तो genetic पे कैसे हुआ?
सर क्योंकि सर ये जो एग्जांपल है आप अगर यहाँ पे देखो तो मेरे मॉम डैड ने मुझे चाहे वो चाहे का कि कोई एक पर्सन के साथ कंडीशन और एनवायरनमेंट अलग थे. वो एनवायरनमेंट का फैक्टर तो थोड़ा सा इसमें एनवायरनमेंट जरा होने के बावजूद भी वो इसके लिए पीपल थे जेनेटिक हो सकता.
And in twin brothers which you shared,
सर तो वो सर उनकी मॉम ने शुरू से दूसरा था और आई थिंक 18 मंथ्स की उसमें मैंने हो गए थे 7 इयर्स की उसमें आ गए थे. उसके बाद और वो उस वक्त तक बहुत ही इनहिबिशन में जा सकते थे जो अटैच जो मॉडल्स होंगे तो वो नेगेटिव साइड पे था बट वो सिस्टर्स रिलीव और सेकंड की जो वो सिस्टर्स ने और 14 की इस तक वो दोबारा से मीनिंगफुल अटैचमेंट्स के लिए उनकी बस स्टडी और वो भी मॉडल की थ्योरी को थोड़ा सा
बहुत better understanding would be one twin going through a rough phase and one twin will spread in a comfortable good environment. Then we would have actually spoken कहाँ पे जैसे जो twin studies होती है. And the example which you gave is basically extinction. Any other therapy where you pair कुछ ऐसे भी स्टिमुलस होते होंगे ना जो एक ही पेयरिंग में कंडीशन हो जाती है, कुछ होते होंगे जो सब पेयरिंग्स में नहीं होते.
No idea.
जो आपके बॉडी प्लस में करने के लिए for example or some smoking or camping also जो ब्रेन को डेवलप करते हैं.
How in classical condition?
सर क्लासिकल में मतलब रिफ्लेक्स मतलब वो
ऑपरेट में जा रहा है क्लासिकल कंडीशन कैसे? Give an example. Explain camping.
हम जब तो उसमें सेकंड मॉडल इसमें अलायंस तो उसमें बहुत ही बट मंकीज ने उसे प्रेफर किया तो स्टिल क्लॉथ वाला जो मॉडल था उसको प्रेफर करते हैं कॉन्टैक्ट एंड कॉन्टेक्स्ट में इसी बेसिस पर भी सेंटर है और इनोवेशन मैनिफेस्ट इन दिस कॉन्टैक्ट ऑक्सफोर्ड में काफी मॉडल्स
हाँ कौन से को
वो तो हम अब तुम कि हम आपको हंगर अगर हो गया जिसमें चाइल्ड ये अल्टीमेटली साधन से तो चाइल्ड को सर्वाइव करता
is oxytocin is only in forming formation of attachment or later on adulthood. Even if you get a mother touch now also,
it's all
it will result in oxytocin. And oxytocin, that is why as a rule in placebo effects, when mother would touch you, pain would be off because of release of oxytocin. I think we can speak. I think both of them were presented very well. I don't know why you were anxious. For no reason. It was not a very big stage, I would say. And we all were learning. Presented very well. A lot of command, very slowly. And I think you went through the topic very again and again, and so it was showing that you had very good ease with it. I don't know whether we could have done the same when we were in touch. So I think we congratulate you. Moderators to solicit. Thank you.
Thank you.